Hey guys, tonight we are stepping back, way back, across centuries and oceans, into the hushed, almost sacred spaces where one of history's most deliberate and beautiful rituals took shape. You can almost smell the faint, earthy aroma, see the soft light filtering through paper screens, hear the gentle sound of hot water hitting ceramic. We're exploring the tranquil, intricate world of ancient Japanese tea ceremonies. A journey so calming it just might lull you right to sleep before we finish. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now down in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing on a misty, ancient shore, the waves whispering secrets from distant lands. It's sometime during Japan's Nara or early Heian period, roughly the 8th or 9th century CE. Forget the bustling convenience stores and neon signs, you know. Here, life moves to the rhythm of the seasons and the whispers of Buddhist chants. Tea, as you might know it today, doesn't exist here yet. Not really. Its story for Japan begins far to the west, in the vast imperial courts and serene monasteries of China. For millennia, the Chinese had known the tea plant, Camellia sinensis. Legend whispers that Emperor Shen Nong, the divine farmer, discovered it around 2737 BCE when a leaf from a wild tree drifted into his pot of boiling water. He tasted the infusion and found it invigorating. A charming tale. Right. Whether it's true or just a nice bedtime story, the fact is tea cultivation and consumption were deeply ingrained in Chinese culture long before Japan caught even a whiff of it. In China, tea's use evolved. Initially, it was seen more as a medicinal tonic, a bitter brew to aid digestion or sharpen the mind during long meditation sessions. Think less afternoon cuppa, more ancient energy shot. It was often boiled with other herbs. Ginger, orange peel, maybe some onions or spices. Yeah, imagine that. A spicy, oniony tea. Makes your usual Earl Grey seem a bit bland, doesn't it? This early tea was pressed into cakes or bricks, making it easier to transport. You'd break off a piece, grind it, and boil it up. Not quite the delicate process we're heading towards. The true popularization in China came later, particularly during the Tang Dynasty 618-907 CE. This was when tea culture really bloomed. Lu Yu wrote the Cha Jing, the classic of tea, around 760 CE, essentially writing the rulebook on how to grow, prepare, and drink tea. He described boiling tea leaves with water, sometimes adding salt. Still no milk and sugar. Sorry. This was the era when tea started moving beyond purely medicinal or monastic use and became a beverage enjoyed by the educated elite, poets, and scholars. They appreciated its subtle flavors and the calm it induced. Now, how does this Chinese phenomenon leap across the sea to Japan? Japan, during this period, was actively importing culture, religion, and ideas from China. Japanese monks, scholars, and envoys would travel to the Tang court, absorbing everything from administrative systems to art, philosophy, and yes, tea. They brought back scriptures, artwork, and probably some of those tea bricks tucked away in their luggage. You can picture them on the ships, maybe a bit seasick, clutching their precious cargo, including this strange, dried plant material that promised clarity and focus. Historians still argue whether the very first introduction of tea was purely accidental, through trade goods, or a deliberate import by monks or envoys returning from China. Regardless, the earliest concrete records place tea in Japan during the Nara period. Emperor Shomu is said to have served tea to monks in 729 CE. This suggests its use was initially confined to Buddhist monasteries, mirroring its path in China. Monks found it invaluable for staying awake and alert during long hours of meditation. Imagine trying to meditate all night without a little caffeine boost. They cultivated small tea patches within monastery grounds. One mainstream historical fact is that the monk Saicho 767-822 founder of the Tendai school of Buddhism, is widely credited with bringing tea seeds back from China in 805 CE and planting them on Mount Hiei near Kyoto. Another monk, Kukai 774-835, founder of the Shingon school, also likely played a role in early tea transmission. These weren't guys looking to start a global beverage empire. They were bringing back tools and practices that supported their spiritual discipline. Tea was part of the package deal for serious Buddhist study. A slightly quirkier tidbit is that some early accounts suggest tea wasn't just drunk. It was sometimes eaten as a vegetable dish or mixed into gruel. Boiling leaves with rice or other ingredients wouldn't have been uncommon, treating it perhaps more like a medicinal herb than a standalone drink. You're just tucking into your monk's breakfast of rice gruel thinking, needs a little leafy bitterness. And in goes the tea leaf. Sounds healthy, definitely not your drive-through coffee experience. So, in these early centuries, tea in Japan was rare, precious, and firmly linked to the Buddhist clergy and the imperial court who sponsored them. It was a foreign novelty, a tool for spiritual practice, and a status symbol. You didn't just pop to the corner store for a bag. You probably couldn't even find a corner store for starters. And if you did, they certainly weren't stocking sencha or gyokuro. Tea was exclusive, held in the hands of a select few who had connections to the continent or the highest levels of power. You weren't just drinking tea, you were performing a small act of cultural and spiritual connection to the advanced civilization across the water. It was less about tranquil ritual and more about practicality, status, and staying awake during those long, dark nights of contemplation. The seeds, both literal and metaphorical, were planted. But the complex, serene ceremony we think of today was still centuries away, brewing slowly like a carefully steeped pot. So you're still in this ancient, quiet Japan, where tea isn't the friendly bag in your pantry. It's this almost mystical substance, clutched tight by the robed figures in monasteries and the silks of the imperial court. For the monks, tea was less about a cozy break and more about serious business, the business of enlightenment. Imagine trying to sit in silent meditation from dusk till dawn, the flickering lamps casting long shadows, your eyelids getting heavier than ancient history textbooks. Tea was their secret weapon. It was their original energy drink, brewed not for taste but for wakefulness, for the ability to push through physical fatigue and keep the mind sharp for sutra chanting and deep contemplation. You're a monk. You've been up since before the sun. Your stomach's grumbling a Gregorian chant of its own, and you've got hours more sitting on a cold floor ahead of you. A bitter cup of tea. Yes, please, and make it strong. This early tea wasn't the whisked matcha you might envision. Records from this time suggest methods closer to the contemporary Chinese practices, boiling the tea leaves, or perhaps powdered tea, sometimes with a pinch of salt or other flavors. Much like we touched on before, it was utilitarian. You weren't admiring the subtle glaze of the bowl, you were probably just grateful it was warm and doing its job. Think of it as the original performance-enhancing supplement. But instead of boosting your bench press, it boosted your ability to not fall asleep face first during prayers. Beyond the monastic needs for alertness, tea also held significant appeal for its perceived medicinal properties. In an age where understanding of health and disease was intertwined with herbalism and sometimes superstition, tea was seen as a valuable remedy. It was believed to aid digestion, to help with headaches, to purify the body, maybe even ward off certain illnesses. If you had a tummy ache, the answer wasn't an antacid. It might well be a bowl of this imported, precious tea. You can almost hear the ancient physician saying, "Ah yes, the humors are unbalanced. Drink this slightly salty, boiled leaf water. That'll sort you out." And you'd probably just nod because, hey, it was expensive, so it must work. Right. It's the ancient equivalent of believing that fancy health shake will cure everything because the bottle costs $20. This medicinal aspect wasn't just folk belief. It was often championed by the same monks who used it for meditation. After all, maintaining bodily health was part of maintaining a disciplined mind and spirit. Some records suggest specific preparations of tea blended with other herbs for targeted ailments. This wasn't about flavor profiles, it was about the chemistry, or at least the perceived chemistry, of the plant interacting with the body. You might be sipping a brew that tastes vaguely of pond water and old socks, but if they told you it would cure your cough, you'd gulp it down. The imperial court also embraced tea, but perhaps with a slightly different emphasis. While its medicinal properties were valued, tea was also a symbol of sophistication and connection to Chinese culture, which was then seen as the pinnacle of civilization. Drinking tea, especially from imported wares, was an act of refinement, a way for the aristocracy to display their cultured tastes and access to rare goods. It was less about needing to stay awake for meditation and more about having the latest, greatest thing from the mainland. You're a court noble. You've got servants fanning you, fancy robes on, and someone offers you this exotic drink. Of course, you accept. It shows you're in. It's like having the newest smartphone, but instead of scrolling TikTok, you're contemplating a leaf. One mainstream historical fact confirming this exclusivity is that records show the imperial court holding tea-drinking events as early as the 9th century. These were likely formal affairs, reinforcing social hierarchies and celebrating cultural exchange. It wasn't a casual catch-up over coffee, it was a performance, a demonstration of status and refined taste. Even if the refined taste at the time involved boiling leaves with salt. A quirky or fringe tidbit from this era is the tale, possibly apocryphal, of Emperor Saga in the early 9th century. He was said to have been so impressed by tea that he ordered it cultivated more widely and even drank it regularly himself, promoting its use among his court. There's a story about him visiting a temple, being served tea, and loving it so much he commanded tea gardens be established in the Kyoto area. This shows a deliberate move, albeit from the very top, to make tea more available, though still within the elite circles. It wasn't exactly a public health initiative. It was more like the emperor found something he liked and decided everyone who mattered should have access to it. However, historians still argue whether the imperial court's early enthusiasm for tea led to widespread cultivation attempts, or if it remained largely limited to monastery gardens and small, difficult-to-maintain plots for the elite. Was there a significant push for domestic production early on? Or did Japan remain heavily reliant on expensive imports from China for centuries? The evidence is spotty, leaving room for scholarly head-scratching. It's hard to get precise agricultural records from 1,200 years ago. Turns out, who knew? So, in these initial centuries in Japan, tea was a tool for spiritual practice, a form of medicine, and a symbol of status. It was consumed in ways that would seem strange to modern tea lovers, often boiled, sometimes mixed with other things, and definitely not part of a calming, aesthetic ritual for the general public. It was functional, valuable, and held in high regard. But the journey from this utilitarian brew to the intricate dance of the tea ceremony had barely just begun. You've seen the seeds planted, the first sips taken by monks and emperors. The next chapter involves a much rowdier crowd. So you've left behind the quiet cloisters and refined, if slightly awkward, court gatherings. The historical tape measure is spooling forward, and the power in Japan is shifting. We're moving past the Heian period's elegant, perhaps overly precious court culture and into an era dominated by a new class, the samurai. These guys weren't just warriors, they became landowners, administrators, the new power brokers in the land. And like any nouveau riche throughout history, they wanted to show off. Big time. And what better way to flaunt your wealth and sophistication or lack thereof, depending on your perspective, than with the most exotic, expensive status symbol around, you guessed it, tea. Tea filtered down from the monasteries and the imperial court to the military class. At first, it might have still carried some of that medicinal or alertness-boosting connotation, useful for military strategy sessions or recovering from a tough battle. But quickly, its role transformed. It went from a functional drink to a central feature of lavish entertainment. These weren't your grandma's quiet bridge club meetings with a cup of Earl Grey. These were parties. Big, boisterous, often extravagant parties thrown by wealthy daimyo feudal lords and high-ranking samurai. The focus of these gatherings wasn't quiet contemplation or spiritual awakening. It was a game called tocha, literally tea tasting. The host would serve guests different bowls of tea, often from various regions of Japan or even imported from China. The guests would then compete to correctly identify the origin of each tea. Sounds simple enough. Right. Like a sophisticated blind taste test. But this was just the framework for something much wilder. Toka quickly devolved, or perhaps evolved, depending on how much you like competitive gambling, into something akin to a high-stakes party game. The host would display their incredible collection of tea utensils, priceless Chinese ceramics, rare kettles, exquisitely decorated caddies. Guests weren't just tasting tea, they were surrounded by an overwhelming display of wealth. Imagine walking into someone's house today and they've casually lined their hallway with Ming Dynasty vases and original Picassos, then asked you to play a guessing game. It was that level of flex. The game itself wasn't just about bragging rights for having a discerning palate. Oh no, there were bets. Significant bets. People wagered land, horses, valuable swords, even servants. You could arrive at a tea party, a rich samurai, and leave, well, potentially walking home. Or worse, asking for a loan from the guy you just played against. It turned the simple act of drinking tea into a gladiatorial arena of taste and chance. It's like if your office coffee tasting competition involved putting your car keys on the line for guessing the difference between Arabica and Robusta. Suddenly, that free office coffee feels a lot riskier. These tocha parties became legendary for their excess. Hosts didn't just serve tea, they laid on elaborate banquets, sometimes stretching over multiple days. Music would play, dancers might perform, and the room would be filled with laughter, shouts, and the clinking of cups, a far cry from the serene silence of a Zen monastery. The tea itself almost became secondary to the spectacle. The gambling, and the opportunity to show off your own collection of rare goods you'd brought to compare with the hosts. One mainstream historical fact that highlights this shift is that during the Muromachi period, 1336–1573, these tocha parties, sometimes called Basara tea gatherings for their flamboyant excess, were incredibly popular among the military elite. Chronicles of the time describe them in detail, often with a disapproving wag of the finger from more traditional or austere observers. These weren't myths. They were documented social events among the powerful. A quirky or fringe tidbit about these parties is the elaborate, sometimes bizarre, nature of the prizes given to winners. It wasn't just money or land. Winning a tea guessing game might net you a rare falcon, a prized horse, an antique sword, or even, weirdly, a specific piece of furniture. Imagine telling your spouse you lost the sofa in a tea game. But honey, I almost correctly identified the uji leaf. It gives high stakes a whole new meaning. Historians still argue whether the primary motivation for these extravagant tocha parties was genuine appreciation for tea and its wares, or simply a thinly veiled excuse for gambling, social networking, and ostentatious displays of wealth among the newly powerful samurai class. Was there a core of true connoisseurship buried beneath the excess? Or was the tea just the trendy backdrop for a high-stakes poker game? It's a fascinating debate about the intersection of culture, status, and human nature's perennial desire to show off. So, you've witnessed tea transform from a monk's aid and an emperor's curiosity into the centerpiece of rowdy, competitive, and often scandalous samurai parties. The focus was entirely external, on the value of the bowls, the origin of the leaves, the thrill of the wager, the display of power. The idea of an internal, spiritual, or even simply quiet appreciation for the act of making and drinking tea was still largely absent from this scene. But even within this extravagance, the seeds of change were being sown, quietly, by a different group seeking a deeper meaning. You've seen the party? Now get ready for the hangover and the search for something simpler. You've seen the flash and heard the clamor of the samurai tea parties, a whirlwind of wealth, wagers, and questionable taste in prizes. While the powerful lords were busy betting their stables on whether a tea leaf came from Uji or somewhere else seriously, guys, a quieter, deeper movement was brewing in the background. As the samurai class rose, so too did the influence of Zen Buddhism in Japan, imported from China, much like tea itself. Zen offered a path to enlightenment not through complex rituals or scholarly debates, but through meditation, discipline, and finding profound meaning in the simple acts of everyday life. And guess what simple act they found particular resonance in? Yep, tea. Zen monasteries became centers for a completely different kind of tea consumption. Here, tea wasn't a prop for a gambling game or a medicinal tonic to gulp down. It was integrated into the spiritual practice itself. Monks used tea to stay alert during long, often grueling, hours of seated meditation, zazen. We touched on this earlier with the very first monk, Sequoia, but now, with Zen's emphasis on focused, present moment awareness, the act of preparing and drinking tea took on new significance. It wasn't just about wakefulness, it was about mindfulness. Imagine you're a Zen monk. Your life is about stripping away distractions, focusing the mind, finding clarity amidst the noise. Every action, from sweeping the garden to washing your bowl, is a practice. Preparing tea fits perfectly into this. The focused attention required to handle the utensils, boil the water just right, and whisk the tea becomes a form of moving meditation. Each step is deliberate, requiring presence. You're not thinking about yesterday's chores or tomorrow's sermon. You're just here, now, with the water, the tea, the bowl. It's the ultimate ancient anti-multitasking tool. Zen monasteries also developed simple, communal tea rituals. Monks would gather to share tea, often a stark contrast to the elaborate banquets of the samurai. This shared tea was a moment of quiet connection, of shared discipline, reinforcing the communal aspect of monastic life. It wasn't a competition, it was communion. Think of it less like a swanky cocktail party and more like sharing a simple, nourishing meal together, but with tea instead of soup. This Zen approach championed simplicity and austerity, concepts that stood in direct opposition to the basara extravagance of the samurai tea parties. Zen aesthetics favored the natural, the unadorned, the beauty found in imperfection and age. This contrasted sharply with the samurai obsession with flashy, perfect, often imported Chinese treasures. A cracked, humble Japanese bowl, aged gracefully, held more appeal to a Zen practitioner than a pristine, gilded porcelain cup from the mainland. This aesthetic preference would become foundational to the later tea ceremony style. One mainstream historical fact highlighting Zen's role is that prominent Zen masters actively promoted tea consumption among their disciples, writing about its benefits for meditation and incorporating it into monastic schedules. Figures like Eisai 1141-1215, who is often credited with bringing back new tea varietals and cultivation methods from China during the Kamakura period, and writing Kissa Yojoki treatise on drinking tea for health, were deeply connected to both Zen and tea. He championed tea not just for physical health, but implicitly for its mental benefits conducive to Zen practice. A quirky or fringe tidbit relates to specific anecdotes found in Zen texts, where tea is used in unexpected teaching moments. One story tells of a monk who was scolded by his master for drinking tea without being fully present, illustrating that even this simple act could be done mindlessly. It wasn't enough to just drink the tea. You had to be the tea drinker, fully aware of the experience. Talk about pressure for your morning cuppa. Historians still argue whether the move toward simplicity and mindfulness in tea practice was solely driven by Zen philosophy, or if it was also influenced by other factors like the economic realities that limited access to extravagant goods for some, or the independent development of Japanese aesthetic sensibilities distinct from continental trends. Was Zen the primary engine of this change? Or was it one powerful current in a confluence of factors steering tea away from excess? The exact blend of influences remains a subject of scholarly debate, a gentle, simmering question in the teapot of history. So, while the samurai were loudly showing off their wealth with tea, a quieter revolution was taking place in the monasteries. Zen Buddhism was infusing the simple act of drinking tea with discipline, mindfulness, and an appreciation for austerity. This wasn't yet the formalized ceremony, but the essential ingredients were being mixed: tea, quiet focus, and a deep connection between the physical act and the inner state. You've seen the party lights dimming and the quiet glow of monastic life appearing. Next, we see the first deliberate steps towards bringing this quiet intentionality into a specific kind of tea gathering, one that valued simplicity over spectacle. You've felt the quiet pull of the Zen monasteries, the counterpoint to the loud samurai parties. Now, as the Muromachi period progresses, these two threads, the raucous display of wealth and the humble discipline of Zen, begin to intertwine. Or perhaps one begins to consciously push back against the other. Stepping onto the scene is a figure considered foundational to the tea ceremony as we know it, Murata Juko. Living from around 1423 to 1502, Juko was a tea master who served powerful figures like the shogun Ashikaga Yoshimasa, but he was also deeply influenced by Zen Buddhism. Having studied under the famous monk Ikkyu Sojun, Juko looked at the tocha parties and saw something lacking. He saw the focus on the external, the price of the bowl, the rarity of the tea origin, the status of the guests. He wanted to bring the internal focus of Zen, the mindfulness and the appreciation for simplicity, into the tea gathering itself. His key contribution was introducing and championing the concept of wabi-chabi into the world of tea. Now, wabi is one of those beautifully complex Japanese concepts that's hard to translate perfectly. It's not just simplicity, it's finding beauty in the humble, the rustic, the imperfect, the aged, the understated. It's about quietness, restraint, and a certain solitary quality. Think of a moss-covered stone versus a glittering pile of jewels. Juko argued that true appreciation of tea didn't require priceless Chinese treasures. In fact, the obsession with such luxury distracted from the real point. He advocated for the use of humbler, often Japanese-made, utensils. A rough bison ware bowl, showing the marks of the potter's hand and the kiln's fire, held more wabi spirit for him than a flawless, impossibly expensive Chinese ceramic. Juko's tea practice, which came to be known as wabi-cha-cha, was a deliberate move towards austerity and introspection. His tea rooms were likely smaller, perhaps only a few mats in size, fostering intimacy rather than grand spectacle. The focus shifted from identifying tea origins and winning bets to the shared experience between host and guest, the quiet appreciation of the simple implements, the taste of the tea itself, and the moment of connection. It's like moving from a loud, crowded banquet hall to a quiet, intimate dinner with a close friend. You're still eating, but the experience is entirely different. This was revolutionary. In an era where owning and displaying Chinese art and ceramics called karamono, or Chinese things, was the height of sophistication. Juko was saying, actually, this slightly chipped, locally made bowl has more soul. He was elevating the humble, finding profound beauty in the ordinary. Much like Zen teaches you to find enlightenment not just on a mountaintop, but in washing your bowl. He sought a sense of cold and withered kuleng, korei, a quiet, austere beauty, in contrast to the ornate and luxurious huali, karoi of the Basara style. One mainstream historical fact confirming Juko's impact is his documented influence on Shogun Ashikaga Yoshimasa, who, despite his taste for luxury, he built the opulent Ginkaku-ji. The Silver Pavilion reportedly sought Juko's guidance on tea and moved towards a slightly less ostentatious style in some of his tea practices. Juko is widely regarded as the person who first articulated the principles that would define the future of the tea ceremony, centering it on the host-guest relationship and the spirit of wabi. A quirky or fringe tidbit about Juko is his famous 4.5 mat room, Si Dieban, Yojohan preference. While not the absolute first to use small rooms, he championed this size as ideal for tea gatherings, believing it fostered the necessary intimacy and focus. Before this, tea rooms could be large halls. Imagine trying to have a quiet, introspective experience in a room the size of a ballroom, versus a space barely larger than a walk-in closet. The smaller room forces closeness, minimizes distraction, and makes every object within it feel significant. It's the original tiny house movement, But for tea, historians still argue about the extent to which Juko single-handedly invented wabi-cha versus formalizing and promoting existing trends already present in monastic life and among certain aesthetes. Was he a lone genius revolutionizing the practice, or was he the right person at the right time? Articulating a sensibility that was already emerging from the blend of Zen and Japanese aesthetic preferences. The debate centers on his originality versus his role as a synthesizer and popularizer of evolving ideas. So, with Murata Juko, tea begins its transformation from a party game or a monastic necessity into something approaching a spiritual and aesthetic discipline. The focus shifts inward, away from the cost of the bowl and towards the feeling it evokes, away from competitive guessing and towards quiet connection. You've seen the seeds of wabi planted, the preference for the simple and aged taking root. But this was just the beginning. Another master would take Juko's ideas and refine them further, setting the stage for the ultimate tea man. You've seen the foundational stone of wabi-cha laid by Murata Juko, the call for simplicity and finding beauty in the humble. But like any great movement, it didn't stop there. Building upon Juko's vision came another pivotal figure, Takano Ju, who lived from 1502 to 1555. If Juko was the father of wabi-cha, Ju was the dedicated craftsman, meticulously polishing the aesthetic, defining its contours, and laying down more specific guidelines for what this cold and withered beauty actually looked and felt like in practice. Ju wasn't from the monastic or warrior class like many early tea figures. He was from a wealthy merchant family in Sakai, a major port city known for its thriving trade and independent spirit. This background gave him a different perspective. He was educated, studied classical Japanese poetry, particularly the waka form, known for its evocative simplicity and melancholy beauty, and was also deeply involved in Zen practice. He synthesized these influences, Juko's tea principles, Zen philosophy, and the aesthetic sensibilities found in Japanese literature and art, to refine the wabi ideal for tea, where Juko introduced the concept of valuing humble, domestic wares over expensive karamono. Ju became more specific. He championed particular types of rustic Japanese ceramics, like iga and bizenware, with their natural ash glazes and often asymmetrical, imperfect forms. He saw profound beauty in their unpretentiousness and the stories etched into them by fire and time. He wasn't just saying use simple stuff. He was saying use this simple stuff and understand why it's beautiful. Aha, Steve, it's like the difference between being told to wear casual clothes and being told to wear this specific brand of minimalist, ethically sourced, slightly too expensive for what it is t-shirt. Ju also integrated the mood and aesthetic of classical Japanese poetry into the tea experience. Poems evoking loneliness, the turning of seasons, or the quiet beauty of nature became inspirations for the atmosphere he cultivated in his tea room. The feeling wasn't just simplicity, it was a specific kind of elegant, understated melancholy, a recognition of impermanence, a quiet acceptance of things as they are. Imagine sipping tea and feeling the same quiet resonance as reading a poem about a single dewdrop on a leaf. His tea gatherings further emphasized the host-guest connection in an intimate setting. The space itself became simpler, sometimes even more rustic than Juko's preferred 4.5 mat room. The entrance might be deliberately small and low, the Nijiraguchi, which forces guests to humble themselves by crawling in, a feature often attributed to the next master, but built on Ju's principles of humility and entering a separate, sacred space. Every object, every movement was intended to contribute to a singular atmosphere of quietude and focused presence. Ju's merchant background also influenced the spread of wabi-cha. While it originated among monks and appealed to some aesthete warlords, Ju helped popularize this style among the burgeoning merchant class. These were wealthy individuals who might not have had the inherited status of the samurai or the spiritual authority of the monks, but they had resources and sought cultural refinement. Wabi-cha offered them a path to cultivate taste and sophistication outside the flashy basara norm, using aesthetics rather than sheer expense as the measure of value. It allowed them to be cultured connoisseurs without needing a castle full of Chinese treasures. One mainstream historical fact is that Takino-ju is recognized for formalizing many aspects of the wabi-cha aesthetic and practice, passing these refined principles down to his students, most notably the legendary Sen no Rikyu. Ju's teachings and aesthetic preferences were crucial in shaping the specific utensils, room layouts, and overall atmosphere that would become standard in the tea ceremony. He was the essential bridge between the originator and the ultimate popularizer. A quirky or fringe tidbit about Ju relates to his specific love for certain simple, unglazed wares, sometimes elevating items previously considered utilitarian or even crude to the status of esteemed tea utensils. He saw beauty in the rough texture and natural variations created by the firing process. Appreciating the accidental artistry of the kiln, it's like being the first person to look at a rusty piece of metal and say, you know, that actually has a certain charm. Historians still argue about the precise balance of influences in Ju's aesthetic. Was he primarily expanding on Juko's Zen-inspired ideas, or were his tastes equally, or even more strongly, shaped by his deep knowledge of Japanese literature and his own unique artistic sensibilities? The debate isn't whether he was important, but about the primary wellsprings of his specific refinement of the wabi aesthetic. So, Takano-ju took Juko's concept of wabi and gave it form, defining the aesthetic preferences and atmosphere more clearly. He deepened the connection to Japanese culture, particularly its poetry, and helped spread this refined sensibility. You've seen the aesthetic taking shape, the quiet preference becoming more defined. Now, get ready for the figure who would take these principles, elevate them to an art form, and make the tea ceremony an enduring cultural icon. Even at great personal risk, you've watched the concept of wabi unfold, from Juko's initial spark to Ju's careful refinement. Now, the stage is set for the figure who would take these ideas, infuse them with profound philosophical depth, and crystallize them into the art form that is the Japanese tea ceremony. Enter Sen no Rikyu, who lived from 1522 to 1591. If tea history had a Mount Rushmore, Rikyu wouldn't just be on it, he'd be the entire mountain. Rikyu, like Ju, hailed from Sakai, that bustling merchant city. He studied tea under Ju, absorbing the principles of wabi and the appreciation for simple, rustic beauty. But Rikyu didn't just copy his teacher, he deepened the practice, imbuing it with his own rigorous aesthetic and spiritual understanding. He synthesized the lineage of tea from the monasteries through Juko and Ju, with his own profound engagement with Zen, creating what is considered the pinnacle of wabi-cha, the very way of tea chado or sado. What made Rikyu's contribution so significant? He didn't just use simple things, he found the sacred in them. He didn't just hold tea gatherings, he created immersive experiences designed to strip away the concerns of the outside world and focus the participants entirely on the present moment. The connection between host and guest, and the beauty of the understated. His tea room wasn't just a place to drink tea, it was a sanctuary, a universe unto itself. Deliberately small, often reduced to just 2 mats or even a single mat, smaller than most modern bathrooms, forcing an intense intimacy. Rikyu is credited with establishing many of the specific rituals and procedures that are still followed today. Every movement, from the way the host purifies the utensils to the way a guest turns the bowl before drinking, was imbued with meaning and refined for aesthetic flow and spiritual focus. He wasn't just making tea, he was choreographing a silent dance of respect, mindfulness, and aesthetic appreciation. It's like he took the basic recipe for baking cookies and turned it into a Michelin star-level performance art piece. His influence wasn't limited to aesthetic theory. It reached the highest echelons of power during a turbulent period in Japanese history. He became the tea master to the 2 successive unifiers of Japan, Oda Nobunaga and his successor, Toyotomi Hideyoshi. These powerful warlords, despite their military might and ambition, were captivated by the quiet authority and aesthetic vision of Rikyu. They used tea gatherings, often hosted by Rikyu, as diplomatic tools, social events, and personal retreats. Rikyu's status rose immensely, giving him unprecedented influence, even advising Hideyoshi on matters of taste and architecture. This relationship, however, was a double-edged sword. While it cemented Rikyu's place in history and popularized his style, it also placed him in a precarious position, caught between his unwavering wabi ideals and the sometimes flamboyant demands of a ruler like Hideyoshi, who, despite his respect for Rikyu, also appreciated grand displays of power, sometimes incorporating ostentatious elements into tea gatherings that Rikyu himself would have found distasteful. Rikyu famously clashed with Hideyoshi over various matters, embodying the tension between spiritual aesthetic purity and political expediency. Rikyu also revolutionized the appreciation of tea utensils. He championed humble Japanese-made bowls, particularly the hand-molded raku ware, over the highly prized Chinese imports. Raku bowls, with their irregular shapes and spontaneous glaze effects, perfectly embodied the wabi aesthetic of imperfection and naturalness. He worked directly with potters, guiding their work to achieve the specific look and feel he desired. One mainstream historical fact is that Rikyu's patronage and aesthetic preferences were instrumental in establishing raku ware as a distinct and highly valued type of Japanese ceramic, specifically for the tea ceremony. A quirky or fringe tidbit is the story of Rikyu's morning glory, Hideyoshi. Wanting to see Rikyu's famous garden full of morning glories, was invited for tea. Upon arrival, Hideyoshi found the garden completely bare of flowers. Inside the small tea hut, however, Rikyu had placed a single perfect morning glory in a simple vase, positioned so it was the sole focus of the alcove. It was a masterful, slightly cheeky demonstration of wabi, focusing intense beauty in a single point rather than overwhelming excess. Hideyoshi, supposedly, was deeply moved, though you have to wonder if he also thought, seriously, you pulled all the flowers for one. Historians still argue about the exact reasons for Rikyu's eventual command by Hideyoshi to commit ritual suicide seppuku. Was it purely a result of their aesthetic and philosophical clashes? A clash between Wabi and Hideyoshi's more opulent tastes? Was it political intrigue, what with rivals poisoning Hideyoshi's mind? Or was there a specific, perhaps now obscure transgression that triggered the command? The debate adds a layer of tragic mystery to Rikyu's already compelling story. With Sen no Rikyu, the disparate elements, the monk's tea, the samurai's spectacle rejected, the Zen focus, Juko's vision, Ju's refinement, were brought together and elevated into a profound, highly formalized yet deeply simple and humanistic practice. You've seen the way of tea fully articulated, its aesthetic defined, its spiritual core revealed. You've seen the master who shaped it, influencing lords and defining an art form, ultimately paying the highest price for his convictions. Now, we delve deeper into the philosophy that underpins this meticulously crafted experience. You've walked with Rikyu, seen him shape the way of tea from earlier threads, elevate wabi to an art form, and ultimately pay the price for his unwavering principles. But what exactly were those principles that he held so dear? What is the philosophical bedrock upon which this entire, seemingly simple yet incredibly complex ritual is built at the heart of the tea ceremony? Particularly in the wabi-cha style perfected by Rikyu, lie four core concepts, often referred to by their Japanese names, wa, kei, sei, and jaku: harmony, respect, purity, and tranquility. These aren't just nice ideas. They are the guiding stars for every action taken, every object chosen, every moment shared within the tea space. Let's break them down. First, harmony. This principle asks you to find balance and accord in everything. Harmony between the host and the guest, a seamless flow of intent and reception. Harmony among the guests themselves, a sense of shared purpose and comfortable presence. Harmony between people and nature, acknowledging the season, using seasonal decorations, appreciating the natural materials of the utensils. Harmony between people and the objects used, treating each bowl, whisk, or kettle not just as a tool, but as a cherished entity with its own story and spirit. You're not just having people over for tea, you're aiming for a perfect, gentle synchronicity, like a flock of birds turning in the sky, but indoors and with less flapping. Next, caging. Respect. This goes beyond simple politeness. It's a deep reverence shown to the host, the guests, the tea itself, the utensils, and the space. The guest shows respect for the host's effort in preparing the gathering. The host shows respect for the guest by creating a welcoming, thoughtful environment. Utensils are handled with care and appreciation, not just as inanimate objects. The tea room is entered with humility, leaving the ego and worldly status outside. It's about recognizing the inherent worth in every person, every object, and the very act of sharing tea. It's the opposite of that feeling when someone shoves their empty mug at you without making eye contact. Then comes seiching, purity. This operates on multiple levels. There's the obvious physical cleanliness, the tea room, the garden path leading to it, the utensils. Even the host and guests must be ritually cleaned before entering. This isn't just hygiene, it's a purification, washing away the dust and grime of the outside world. But there's also spiritual and mental purity. The tea room is a space to cleanse your mind, to let go of worries, ambitions, and distractions. You enter the room leaving your baggage at the door, both literal and metaphorical. It's like hitting the mental reset button. But instead of rebooting your brain, you're sipping tea in a spotless room. Finally, Jakuji, tranquility. This is often considered the ultimate state achieved through the practice of wabi-cha. It's the deep peace, stillness, and calm that arises from the successful integration of the first three principles. It's the quiet mind, free from agitation, able to fully experience the present moment. This principle is strongly linked to the Zen concept of sabi, the beauty of age and solitude, and wabi itself. Jaku isn't just relaxation, it's a state of profound, active stillness, a quiet awareness of the universe in a single bowl of tea. Imagine that feeling after a really good meditation session, but with the added bonus of delicious matcha. These four principles are interconnected and mutually reinforcing. Harmony and respect create the conditions for purity, and from purity and the focused actions of the ceremony, tranquility can emerge. Every step in the tea ceremony, from the moment a guest approaches the tea hut to the final bow, is a physical manifestation of these philosophical ideals. The quiet path through the garden helps cultivate purity and prepare for tranquility. The careful bowing and handling of utensils demonstrate respect and contribute to the harmony of the movements. The seasonal flower in the alcove and the choice of a bowl that suits the guest embody harmony with nature and the individual. One mainstream historical fact is that while the term Wakeisei Jaku as a specific four-principle set is often attributed to Rikyu's successors or later schools, the concepts themselves are undeniably present in Rikyu's teachings and approach to tea. Drawing heavily from Zen Buddhism and earlier aesthetic traditions, they became the standard framework for understanding the philosophical core of Chanoyu. A quirky or fringe tidbit relates to how, say, purity was sometimes interpreted with almost obsessive attention to detail. Legends describe tea masters inspecting every grain of sand in the garden path or ensuring the tea room was so spotless you could eat off any surface. While perhaps exaggerated, it speaks to the principle's emphasis on creating a perfectly clean and uncluttered environment to facilitate mental purity. It's like the ultimate deep clean, but for your soul. Historians still argue whether Rikyu himself articulated these four principles as a distinct set, or if they were later systematized by his disciples and subsequent generations to encapsulate his complex teachings. Did Rikyu sit down and say, "Right, here are the 4 bullet points"? Or did these ideas permeate his practice and were later codified by others seeking to understand and teach his way? The exact origin and formulation of the Wakiseijaku Quartet remain a point of scholarly discussion. So, you've moved from the history and the masters to the underlying philosophy. You understand now that the tea ceremony isn't just about drinking tea, it's a structured practice for cultivating harmony, respect, purity, and tranquility in a fleeting moment shared between people and the universe. You've grasped the ideals. Next, we'll look at the physical space where these ideals are brought to life, the carefully designed universe of the tea room itself. You've contemplated the invisible threads that weave through the way of tea harmony, respect, purity, and tranquility. But where do these abstract principles live? Where do they take physical form? They reside within a very special kind of space, one specifically designed to be a vessel for the ritual and its philosophy, the chashitsu, the Japanese tea room. This isn't just any room with a kettle, it's a carefully constructed universe unto itself. A minimalist sanctuary deliberately set apart from the mundane world. Imagine you're approaching this space. Often, you wouldn't walk straight into it from the main house. There's usually a small, simple garden path, called the Roji Ludi, the dewy ground. Walking this path is part of the purification process, a transition from the outside world to the inner sanctuary. You might pause at a stone basin sukubai to rinse your hands and mouth, further cleansing yourself and preparing your mind. You are literally and symbolically leaving the dust of the world behind you. It's like walking through a decompression chamber before entering a different atmosphere, only this atmosphere smells faintly of damp earth and moss, not stale air. Then you reach the entrance to the chashitsu, and here's one of its most distinctive and philosophical features, the Nijiraguchi Linku. This isn't a grand door, it's a small, low sliding entrance, maybe only 3 feet high. To enter, you have to stoop low, almost crawl through. Why? This is an act of humility. Regardless of your status outside, whether you're a powerful samurai, a wealthy merchant, or a humble monk, you enter the chashitsu by lowering yourself. You shed your social standing at the threshold, becoming simply a guest on the way of tea, equal to everyone else inside. It's the ultimate equalizer, proving that even history's most feared warlords had to humble themselves to get a decent cup of tea. Step inside and you're struck by the simplicity. The rooms are small, often famously measured in the number of tatami mats on the floor. Rikyu, as we mentioned, favored tiny rooms, like the 2-mat or even 1.5-mat space, creating intense intimacy. The walls are often made of simple earth plaster. The ceiling is low, made of natural wood or bamboo. There's minimal decoration. This isn't about opulence, it's about creating a calm, uncluttered environment that encourages focus and introspection. Every element serves a purpose, either functional for the tea preparation or aesthetic in the wabi sense. The most important decorative element is usually found in the tokonoma chuang no chian, a recessed alcove. This is the heart of the aesthetic display. It will typically contain a hanging scroll kakemono, often with calligraphy or simple painting, and a single flower or small, understated seasonal arrangement, chabana. That's it. No cluttered shelves, no busy patterns. The scroll and the flower are chosen to evoke a particular mood, reflect the season, or convey a message related to the day's gathering. It's like having just one perfectly chosen piece of art in your entire house, forcing you to really look at it, really see it. The layout within the chashitsu is also carefully planned. There's the host's space, where the tea is prepared, usually centered around the hearth row embedded in the floor in winter, or a portable brazier furo in summer. The guest sits opposite, observing the host's movements. The positioning is deliberate, facilitating the interaction and allowing the guest to witness the meticulous process of tea making, which is central to the ritual. How does this design embody the principles? The small size and the roji path foster purity by separating you from the outside world and focusing your mind. The Nijiraguchi enforces respect and humility. The minimalist aesthetic, the simple materials, and the seasonal display in the takonoma embody harmony with nature and the wabi ideal. And all of this culminates in the creation of an atmosphere conducive to jaku, tranquility, allowing for a quiet, focused, and peaceful experience. It's architectural mindfulness, One mainstream historical fact is that the development of the small, rustic chashitsu was a direct outcome of the evolution of wabi-cha, championed by masters like Ju, and most notably, Rikyu, as a deliberate counterpoint to the large, lavish rooms used for earlier tea gatherings. These small huts became the iconic setting for the refined way of tea. A quirky or fringe tidbit concerns the very first shashitsu designed by Rikyu, called Taian Daian, which still exists today and is a national treasure. It's a mere 2 tatami mats in size, plus a service area. Standing inside it, or even seeing pictures, you are struck by just how incredibly small and simple it is. It's almost shocking in its austerity, proving Rikyu wasn't kidding about scaling things back. You could probably touch opposite walls if you stretched your arms out. Historians still argue about the precise lineage of certain shashitsu features. While Rikyu perfected the Nijiriguchi and championed the two-mat room, were these ideas entirely his? Or did he adapt elements that were already starting to appear in monastic or very early wabi spaces? The debate is about attributing specific innovations versus recognizing a gradual evolution of design, influenced by multiple figures and the prevailing aesthetic shift. So, you've seen the physical space? The carefully designed container for the ritual? You understand that the chashitsu isn't just architecture, it's a philosophical statement in wood, earth, and straw. It's where the principles of harmony, respect, purity, and tranquility are not just thought about, but actively lived. You've set the stage. Next, we fill that stage with the actors, the essential tools, each with its own role and significance in this quiet drama. You've navigated the dew-kissed path, humbled yourself at the low entrance, and settled into the quiet embrace of the chashitsu, that perfectly imperfect little universe designed for focus. Now, within this carefully curated space, your attention turns to the silent actors of the ritual, the shadog, the tea tools. These aren't just spoons and bowls. In the way of tea, each object is chosen with intention, handled with reverence, and holds layers of history, symbolism, and aesthetic value. They are as crucial to the experience as the tea itself. Think of the chadog as the supporting cast in this quiet drama. They aren't flashy or loud, especially in wabi chai, but they are essential. Their beauty lies not in gaudy decoration, but in their form, their material, their age, and the story they tell through subtle imperfections. Selecting the right chadog for a specific gathering, considering the season, the guests, and the occasion, is a significant part of the host's art, embodying the principle of harmony. Let's meet some of the key players. First, the undeniable star. Besides the tea itself, the chawan, the tea bowl. This is the object you will hold, feel, and gaze into as you drink. Chawan come in an astonishing variety of shapes, sizes, and glazes. Rikyu, as we discussed, favored simple rustic types like raku bowls, with their uneven shapes and rich, sometimes unpredictable glazes. But you'll also encounter bowls from regions like Hagi, Karatsu, or Edo from Korea, each with distinct characteristics. The subtle variations in color, texture, weight, and form are all part of the bowl's personality. An asymmetrical shape or a tiny chip, far from being flaws, can be seen as points of interest, adding to the bowl's unique wabi character. Holding a beautiful ancient bowl connects you tactily to history, to the potter's hands, to all the others who have held it before. It's way more meaningful than sipping from a disposable cup, obviously. Next, the chasen, the bamboo whisk. This delicate, almost fragile tool is crafted from a single piece of bamboo, split into dozens, sometimes hundreds, of fine tines. Its sole purpose is to whisk the powdered matcha tea in hot water into a smooth, frothy suspension. The rhythmic sound of the whisk against the bowl is one of the key auditory elements of the ceremony. After just a few uses, the tines begin to straighten and break. The chasen is a tool of beautiful impermanence, used fully and then retired, symbolizing the host's effort given entirely to this specific moment. It's like a tiny, dedicated butler made of bamboo, whose only job is foam. The chishaku, the tea scoop, is typically a simple, elegantly curved scoop made from bamboo. It's used to transfer the precise amount of matcha from its container into the bowl. Sometimes these scoops are carved by the tea masters themselves, or by renowned craftsmen, and given poetic names related to nature or philosophy. Their simplicity is their beauty, the natural form of the bamboo, the subtle curve, the quiet efficiency of its function. It's a humble tool with a significant job, like the unsung hero of the cutlery drawer. The matcha itself is kept in a tea caddy. For thick tea kocha, this is often a ceramic jar called a chera charu. For thin tea usucha, it's typically a lacquered container called a natsume zao, named after its resemblance to a jujube fruit. These containers can be incredibly valuable and historically significant, passed down through generations of tea masters and daimyo. Their aesthetic, whether ceramic or lacquer, contributes to the visual harmony of the tools displayed. Heating the water is the job of the kama, the iron kettle, often ancient and heavy. These kettles are valued not just for their function, but for their presence and the beautiful sound the water makes as it heats. A gentle simmering or bubbling, often likened to wind in the pines. The kettle sits over a hearth in winter or a brazier furrow in summer. Its dark, textured surface a grounding element in the room. Other essential tools include the mizusashi, a container for fresh water, used for replenishing the kettle or cooling water, and the hishaku, a long bamboo ladle used to transfer hot water from the kettle to the bowl, and cold water from the mizusashi. Each tool, from the grand kettle to the humble whisk rest, has a specific place, a specific way it is handled, contributing to the deliberate flow of the ceremony. One mainstream historical fact is that the appreciation and collection of chidagu, particularly antique pieces and those favored by famous masters, became a significant aspect of the way of tea from Rikyu's time onwards. Certain bowls, kettles, or caddies are considered national treasures in Japan due to their artistic merit and historical provenance, demonstrating the elevation of these functional objects to the realm of high art. A quirky or fringe tidbit is the practice of tea masters sometimes giving names to their favorite utensils, imbuing them with personality and narrative. A scoop might be named Morning Mist, or a bowl Silent Moon. This anthropomorphism highlights the deep connection and respect the practitioners feel for these objects. Seeing them as partners in the ritual rather than mere tools, it's like naming your favorite pen. But with centuries of accumulated cultural weight, historians still argue about the historical authenticity or original purpose of some highly revered tea tools. Was this particular bowl truly used by a famous master, or was that attribution added later to increase its value? Were some objects originally intended for tea, or were they repurposed from other uses? Their new function changing their perceived meaning. The debate adds a layer of fascinating detective work to the study of chidog. So, you've seen the essential cast of characters, the tools of the trade? You understand that each one, from the sturdy kettle to the ephemeral whisk, plays a vital role and holds deep meaning within the chashitsu. You've got the space and the tools. Now, we finally begin the ritual itself. The sequence of actions that brings all these elements together in a dance of mindfulness and connection. You've admired the tools, felt the quiet power they hold, sitting patiently in the carefully designed space of the chashitsu. Now, let's shift perspective slightly and imagine you are a guest invited to a formal tea gathering. The ritual doesn't start when you sit down with a bowl. It begins much earlier. The moment you step onto the property, you are met at an outer gate by the host or an attendant, a subtle signal that you are leaving the outside world behind. No ringing the doorbell and shouting, "I'm here, I allowed." Your journey into the tea space continues along the roji, the garden path we mentioned. This path isn't just landscaping, it's a deliberate transition zone. It might be winding, designed to slow your pace and encourage mindfulness. The sounds of the city or the main house fade away, replaced by the crunch of gravel, the rustle of leaves, maybe the sound of water. You are guided through this space, shedding your worldly concerns with each step. It's a walking meditation, preparing your mind and spirit for the tranquility of the Chishitsu. It's like a real-life loading screen, but way prettier and involving moss. Along the path, you come to the stone basin, the Tsukubai. Here, you pause. Using a bamboo ladle, Tsukubai Hishaku, you ritually wash your hands and rinse your mouth. This isn't just for physical cleanliness, though that's part of Sia purity. It's also a symbolic act of purification, washing away the mental dust of the outside world. You are cleansing yourself before entering a sacred space. It's a quiet moment of focus before the main event, like mentally shaking off the day's emails before stepping into a yoga class. Finally, you arrive at the Chishitsu itself, and there it is, the Nijiriguchi, that famously low entrance. You must humble yourself, literally bending low or crawling on your knees, to pass through. Swords, symbols of status and aggression in the samurai era, were traditionally left outside, further emphasizing the equality within the tea room. As you enter, the simple beauty of the interior enfolds you. You might first face the tokonoma, the alcove, where you take a moment to admire the hanging scroll and the single flower arrangement, appreciating the host's choices and their reflection of the season and the day's theme. Then you quietly take your assigned seat on the tatami mats. If this is a formal, longer tea gathering known as a chaji requiring 4+ guests in several hours, the ritual often begins not with tea, but with a meal. This is kaiseki. Now, don't think feast. Kaiseki is a light, meticulously prepared, multi-course meal. Its purpose isn't to stuff you full, but to prepare your palate and stomach for the tea, to warm you from the inside out, especially in colder months, and to extend the shared time between host and guests, deepening the connection before the main tea service. The dishes are seasonal, presented beautifully, and served in exquisite, often humble, ceramics that align with the wabi aesthetic. The flow of kaiseki is deliberate. Small portions of various dishes are served, emphasizing fresh, local ingredients and subtle flavors. There's usually a soup, some sashimi, grilled or simmered dishes, rice, and pickles, and importantly, sake is often served and shared, fostering warmth and camaraderie among the guests and with the host. It's a moment of relaxed interaction, a contrast to the more focused tea preparation that will follow. Think of it as the appetizer round before the main course, where the main course is pure, concentrated mindfulness. One mainstream historical fact is that the inclusion of kaiseki as a standard part of a formal tea-gathering chaji was formalized during the time of Senno Rikyu and his successors, evolving from earlier forms of host-provided refreshments to become a distinct and important part of the overall ritual sequence. A quirky or fringe tidbit is the traditional order and specific types of dishes served in kaiseki. There's a prescribed sequence, starting with a soup and 1 or 2 side dishes, followed by grilled items, then simmered, and so on. Breaking this order would be highly unusual. It's not just, here's some food, it's, here's the food, served in this exact traditional pattern. It's the ultimate culinary choreography. Historians still argue about the historical evolution of kaiseki within the tea ceremony context. Did it develop organically from the need to provide sustenance during long gatherings? Or was its integration more deliberate, shaped by tea masters seeking to create a holistic aesthetic and philosophical experience that included food as well as tea? The debate is about whether the meal was a practical addition that became ritualized, or if it was conceived from the start as an integral part of the way. After the kaiseki meal, there's often a brief break called nakadachi. Guests retire to a waiting area in the garden while the host prepares the tea room specifically for the main tea service, the thick tea, koicha. This allows the host to change the scroll in the takonoma, perhaps from a calligraphic piece to a painting more suited to the post-meal mood, and prepare the hearth and utensils for the tea. It's a physical pause, a moment for the guests to stretch their legs and mentally shift gears from enjoying the meal to preparing for the more focused experience of the tea itself. You've been nourished, physically and socially. Now, you get ready for the heart of the matter. You've enjoyed the quiet passage through the garden, purified your hands and mind, humbled yourself at the entrance, and perhaps shared a simple, beautiful meal. You've had your brief respite, the nakadachi, While the host made their final preparations, now you are invited back into the chashitsu. The scroll in the tokonoma might be different, reflecting the shift from meal to the main event. The air feels expectant, quiet. The stage is set, the tools are waiting, and the host is ready. This is where the heart of the tea ceremony truly begins, the preparation of the tea itself by the host. The host re-enters the room with a serene focus. Their movements precise and economical, honed by years of dedicated practice. Every gesture is deliberate, a dance learned through repetition until it flows naturally, becoming a form of active meditation. They move with a quiet grace that commands attention, not through flashiness, but through focused intention. It's like watching a highly skilled craftsman at work, or maybe even a surgeon. Every move matters, but done with a calmness that belies the complexity. The host first arranges the necessary tools. Then comes a series of purification steps. The tea caddy and the bamboo scoop are carefully wiped clean with a silk cloth. Called a fukusa, the tea bowl is rinsed with hot water and wiped with a linen cloth shaken. This isn't just hygiene, it's a ritual cleansing, preparing the tools for their sacred task. You are witnessing a demonstration of respect for these objects, treating them as entities with their own integrity, worthy of careful attention. Imagine giving your favorite mug this level of ceremonial wipe down every morning. It's different. With the tools purified and ready, the host turns to the matcha. Using the chishaku, the bamboo scoop, they carefully measure the powdered green tea from the caddy into the bowl. For koicha, the thick tea, which is served first and is the main focus of a formal chaji. A significant amount of matcha is used, much more than you'd use for a single serving of thin tea. It's a generous heap of vibrant green powder resting at the bottom of the bowl. Then, hot water from the simmering iron kettle kama is added to the bowl using the bamboo ladle hishaku. For koicha, only a small amount of water is added initially. The host then takes the chasen, the bamboo whisk, and begins to mix the powder with the water. This isn't the frothing motion you might associate with thin tea. For koicha, it's more of a kneading or mixing motion, slowly incorporating the water into the thick powder to create a smooth, consistent paste. It requires strength and control, patiently working out any lumps. You watch, mesmerized by the transformation of the dry powder into a glossy green elixir. Once the paste is smooth, the host adds a bit more hot water, just enough to bring the mixture to the desired thick consistency. The whisking then shifts slightly to integrate the remaining water, but it's still a different motion than for thin tea. The goal is a uniform, velvety texture, not a frothy head. The resulting koicha is thick, almost soup-like, with a deep, intense, slightly bitter, and surprisingly sweet flavor. It's a concentrated essence of tea. Throughout this entire process, the host's focus is absolute. Their breathing is calm, their movements fluid. They are fully present in the moment, pouring their skill, respect, and intention into the preparation. The silence in the room is punctuated only by the soft sounds of the ritual, the clang of the lid on the kettle, the swish of the ladle, the gentle scraping and mixing sound of the whisk against the ceramic bowl. These sounds become part of the atmosphere, contributing to the tranquility. You are witnessing an act of creation, a skilled performance where the medium is hot water and green powder. One mainstream historical fact is that the detailed choreography of the host's movements during tea preparation, particularly for koicha, was largely codified by Sen no Rikyu and further refined by subsequent generations of tea masters. This precise sequence of actions is fundamental to the transmission and practice of the way of tea across different schools. A quirky or fringe tidbit involves stories of masters who could seemingly communicate their state of mind or the intended mood of the gathering through the subtle nuances of their movements. A slight hesitation, a particular rhythm of whisking. These could be interpreted by knowledgeable guests as conveying layers of meaning beyond the simple act of making tea. It's like a secret language spoken through ladles and whisks. Historians still argue about the exact origins of some of the highly specific movements within the tea preparation ritual. Were they developed for practical reasons, most efficient way to mix the powder? Symbolic reasons, mimicking a Buddhist gesture. or purely aesthetic ones. G looks most graceful. The debate is about finding the balance between function, symbolism, and aesthetics in the evolution of the choreography. So, you have witnessed the quiet intensity of the host's labor, the transformation of simple ingredients into the potent brew of koicha. You've seen that the preparation is not just a step before the tea, but an integral part of the experience itself, a meditation in motion. The tea is ready. Now. The focus shifts from the host's hands to the guests as you prepare to receive and appreciate this carefully crafted bowl. You've watched the host's focused, graceful dance of preparation, transforming the vibrant green powder and hot water into the thick, potent brew of koicha. The aroma fills the small, quiet space. The bowl sits ready, a silent invitation. Now. The host turns, and with careful reverence, presents the finished bowl to you, the main guest. This is your moment to engage with the culmination of the host's effort and the spirit of the gathering. The interaction begins with a series of bows, a quiet acknowledgement of the shared moment. You bow to the host, expressing gratitude for their effort and the honor of being served. Then you bow to the other guests, a silent apology for receiving the tea first, a gesture of humility and respect for their presence, embodying K. You receive the bowl from the host, taking its weight in your hands. It feels substantial, perhaps warm from the tea and the earlier rinsing. For the formal koicha service, you typically place the bowl on the tatami mat in front of you briefly and bow to the next guest, again acknowledging their patience. Then you lift the bowl again, bringing it closer. This is where the appreciation truly begins. Before drinking, you take a moment, a significant moment, to admire the bowl. You turn it slowly in your hands, appreciating its form, the texture of the clay, the depth and variation of the glaze. You look for the front of the bowl, often indicated by a particularly beautiful design or a notable feature of the glaze. The side the host carefully oriented towards you when presenting it, you are connecting with the object itself, recognizing its beauty, its age, and its place within the ritual. It's like being handed a piece of art that you're actually allowed to touch and hold. Way better than a museum ropes. Then, out of respect for the bowl and the host, you turn the bowl clockwise in your hands, usually about 2 turns, so that the front is facing away from you when you bring it to your lips. You drink from the side, leaving the most beautiful part of the bowl untouched by your mouth. This is a subtle but profound act of respect, a way of saying, I appreciate your beauty, and I will not mar your face while I partake. It's like having dinner with someone and carefully turning the plate so you don't drip sauce on the nicest part. Now, you finally drink the koicha. It's a thick, intense experience, unlike the thin tea you might be used to. You typically drink it in a few sips, usually 3 or 4, appreciating the rich flavor, the velvety texture, and the warmth. Koicha is often described as having a complex taste, a initial bitterness followed by a surprising sweetness, and a deep, earthy richness. You are meant to savor it, to be fully present with the taste and the feeling of the tea warming you from within. It's mindfulness you can taste. After the final sip, you clean the lip of the bowl where you drank with your fingers. A small piece of paper is usually provided for you to clean your fingers afterwards. Because, well, purity. Then, using the chakin, the linen cloth provided by the host, you carefully wipe the entire lip of the bowl clean, preparing it for the next guest if the bowl is being shared, which is common for koicha in a formal setting. You then turn the bowl counterclockwise, returning the front to face you, and take another moment to admire it, perhaps turning it again to see different angles. This post-drinking appreciation is important. You've now experienced the tea held within the bowl, and you have a deeper connection to it. You might ask the host about the bowl, its history, its potter, its poetic name. This opens a channel for quiet conversation and further deepens the connection between host and guest, and between the guest and the chidog. Finally, you return the bowl to the host, placing it back in front of them with a final bow of gratitude. If there are other guests, the bowl is then passed to the second guest, who repeats the entire process of bowing, receiving, admiring, turning, drinking, wiping, and returning. The shared experience of drinking from the same bowl, particularly the thick koicha, is a powerful act of communion and connection, embodying harmony among the guests. While the main focus of the chaji is the shared koicha, a lighter tea called usucha might be served later, often in individual bowls, allowing for a slightly more relaxed atmosphere and more interaction. Usucha is the frothy tea most people picture, whisked vigorously to create a light foam. The drinking etiquette is similar, but often a bit less strict than for the shared koicha. One mainstream historical fact is that the specific sequence of receiving, turning, and drinking the tea bowl was developed and refined over centuries, becoming a standardized part of the etiquette across different schools of tea ceremony, emphasizing respect and aesthetic appreciation. A quirky or fringe tidbit from historical accounts mentions instances where a guest, deeply moved by the beauty or history of a particular bowl, might even shed a tear of appreciation while holding it. While perhaps an exaggeration, it illustrates the intense emotional and aesthetic connection that could develop between a practitioner and a fine piece of chidog. Don't worry, nobody expects you to cry over your teacup. Historians still argue about the precise symbolic origins of certain guest movements, like the specific way the bowl is turned before drinking. Is it solely out of respect for the aesthetic front? Does it have roots in ancient symbolic gestures related to purification or sharing? The debate delves into the layers of meaning embedded in these seemingly simple actions. So, you have completed the core act of the ceremony from the guest's perspective. You've received the gift of tea, appreciated its vessel, and partaken mindfully. You've experienced the culmination of the host's effort and the spirit of the gathering. You've shared a profound, quiet moment. Now, the ritual begins its gentle winding down, the transition back towards the outside world. You've held the bowl, savored the thick, resonant koicha, and returned the vessel to the host. The intense, shared moment of consuming the main tea has passed, but the ceremony isn't quite over. There's a graceful unwinding, a chance to linger in the tranquility and deepen the appreciation of the experience. The focus now shifts slightly from the drinking of the tea to the quiet contemplation of the objects that made it possible to chidog. After the main tea service, the host will clean the key utensils, the tea caddy, the tea scoop, and often the tea bowl itself, and bring them out for closer inspection by the guests. These aren't just put on a tray, they are presented with the same care and respect as when they were used in the preparation. This is a significant part of the gathering, a chance for the guests to appreciate the host's chosen tools outside the flow of the main action. One by one, or in a small group, you and the other guests approach the presented tools. You handle them with immense care, often placing them on a special cloth or mat provided to avoid scratching the delicate surfaces of the tatami. You are encouraged to pick them up, feel their weight and texture, examine the details up close. You might admire the natural grain of the bamboo scoop, the subtle variations in the glaze of the ceramic caddy, the marks of the potter's hand on the bowl that you previously only saw from a slight distance. It's like visiting an exhibition where you're actually allowed to pick up and hold the artwork. Mind-blowing. Right. This is a moment for quiet discussion and shared aesthetic appreciation. Guests might ask the host about the origin of a particular piece, the artist who made it, its history, or the poetic name it carries. The host shares their knowledge and perhaps an anecdote related to the utensil, adding layers of meaning to the object. This conversation about the chidog isn't small talk. It's a way of engaging more deeply with the host's taste, their collection, and the history embodied in the tools. It further strengthens the connection forged during the silent preparation and drinking. The appreciation of the tools reinforces the principles of wa harmony through shared aesthetic appreciation, respect for the objects and the host's choices, and helps maintain the atmosphere of jaku tranquility. It's a period of calm reflection before returning to the outside world. You've ingested the tea, now you absorb the beauty of its components. One mainstream historical fact is that the practice of admiring the chidog after the tea service became an established and highly valued part of the formal tea-gathering chaji, reflecting the elevation of tea utensils to the status of esteemed art objects and historical artifacts. A quirky or fringe tidbit involves specific, sometimes complex historical rules about how certain types of precious tools were handled during this viewing phase. For example, strict guidelines on how many times a particular renowned tea caddy could be turned or which finger to use when tracing a design. These meticulous rules speak to the extreme reverence held for certain pieces, bordering on ritualistic handling of relics. Imagine needing an instruction manual just to pick up a pot. Historians still argue about the historical emphasis placed on the appreciation of chidogu relative to the act of drinking tea itself at different points in history. While the wabi masters emphasized the spirit of the tea, the value and collection of prestigious tools remained significant, sometimes leading to a tension between the philosophical ideal and the material reality. Did the focus ever shift too much towards the objects rather than the experience? It's a debate about materialism versus mindfulness in the context of an aesthetic practice. As the tool viewing concludes, the atmosphere gently signals the end of the formal gathering. The host offers a final deep bow, expressing sincere gratitude to the guests for their presence and participation. The guests return the bow, expressing their thanks for the host's incredible effort, hospitality, and the profound experience shared. This final exchange of gratitude solidifies the human connection that is at the heart of the way of tea. You then prepare to leave. Following a quiet signal or cue, often the main guest leads the departure. You exit the chashitsu, typically backing out through the nijiraguchi in the reverse order you entered, a final act of respect for the space. You walk back along the roji path, the dewy ground, which now serves as a transition back to the everyday world. The path might feel different on the way out. Perhaps you notice details you missed before, or simply feel a lingering sense of calm and clarity from the tranquility you experienced. You emerge at the outer gate, where the host might offer a final farewell. You carry with you the lingering taste of matcha, the feel of the tea bowl in your hands, the memory of quiet sounds, and, hopefully, a sense of peace and renewed perspective. The ritual has concluded, but its effects are meant to stay with you, influencing how you perceive the world and interact with others. You've left the sanctuary, but the tranquility is portable. You've walked the path, humbled yourself at the entrance, experienced the quiet intensity of the host's preparation, and savored the profound depth of the tea. You've appreciated the tools and departed with a sense of tranquility, stepping back onto the dewy ground that leads to the everyday world. But the journey through the way of tea doesn't end in the 16th century with the masters we've discussed. The seeds planted by monks, nurtured by aesthetes, and brought to fruition by Sen, no Rikyu didn't wither. They multiplied, adapted, and continue to bloom in the modern world. After Rikyu's death, his legacy was not lost. His spirit and teachings were carried on by his sons and grandsons, who founded the major schools of tea ceremony that exist today, most notably Omotesenke, Urasenke, and Mushanokojisenke. While they all trace their lineage directly back to Rikyu and share the core principles of wabi-cha, each school developed its own distinct styles, procedures, and aesthetic nuances over the centuries. Think of them as different dialects of the same beautiful language, each with its own charm and emphasis. You can still learn the way of tea today, following the meticulous traditions passed down through these established lineages. The tea ceremony, or chanoyu as it's often called, has endured through immense historical changes in Japan: civil wars, the closing and opening of the country, the Meiji Restoration, World War II, and the rapid modernization that followed. It survived because it is more than just a ritual. It is a repository of Japanese culture, aesthetics, philosophy, and mindfulness. It became a way to preserve a connection to traditional values and a sense of identity in a rapidly changing world. It's kind of impressive when you think about it. This quiet, simple practice outlasting shogunates, empires, and seismic societal shifts. It turns out drinking tea mindfully is pretty resilient. Today, the tea ceremony is practiced by millions in Japan and increasingly around the globe. It is taught in schools, community centers, and dedicated academies. People from all walks of life study it, not necessarily to become grand masters, none, but for personal development. It's seen as a path to cultivate patience, discipline, grace, respect for others, and an appreciation for beauty in the ordinary. In a fast-paced, digitally saturated world, the 2 hours spent in a tea room, focused entirely on the present moment, can feel like a radical act of resistance, a deliberate step towards slow living and mindfulness. It's the original digital detox. Swap your phone for a chase-in. The core principles of harmony, respect, purity, and tranquility remain the guiding light. The wabi aesthetic, finding beauty in simplicity, imperfection, and the natural world, continues to influence Japanese art, design, and even modern philosophy. You see its echoes in minimalist architecture, in the appreciation of handcrafted goods, in the focus on seasonal ingredients in cuisine. While the traditional chashitsu remains the ideal setting, tea gatherings are also held in more contemporary spaces, in temples, in gardens, or even adapted for different environments. There are modern tea bowls being created, new interpretations of traditional forms. The practice isn't static. It continues to evolve while holding on to its foundational spirit. One mainstream historical fact about its modern form is that the major schools, particularly Ura-senka, have actively promoted the tea ceremony internationally since the post-war period, establishing centers and teaching programs in many countries, allowing people worldwide to study and experience this unique cultural art form. A quirky or fringe tidbit is the existence of extremely niche or unusual tea gatherings today, perhaps held in unexpected locations like rooftops, or incorporating elements that playfully riff on tradition. While purists might raise an eyebrow, these variations show the underlying vitality and adaptability of the way of tea, proving it's not just a museum piece but a living practice. You might even find someone doing a tea ceremony flash mob one day. Who knows? Probably not, but you get the idea. Historians and practitioners still argue about whether modern tea ceremony practice, with its standardized procedures and sometimes large classes, truly captures the deep spiritual and personal intensity of Rikyu's tea, particularly the spontaneity and intuitive connection central to his approach. Has the necessary structure for teaching and transmission led to a loss of the original spirit? Or is the discipline itself the path to that spirit? The debate continues on whether adherence to form guarantees access to the essence. You've journeyed through the history of tea in Japan, from its medicinal arrival to its use as a status symbol, its embrace by Zen, and its perfection as a profound ritual by Senno Rikyu. You've explored its philosophy, its space, its tools, and the intricate dance between host and guest. You've seen how those ancient principles resonate today. The tranquil rituals of ancient Japanese tea ceremonies are not confined to history books. They are a living, breathing art form, offering a timeless path to mindfulness, connection, and finding profound beauty in a simple bowl of tea. It's a reminder that even in the busiest world, moments of peace and presence are always within reach, waiting for you. Just like a perfectly brewed cup, the journey through the way of tea has reached its end tonight. You've navigated centuries of history, felt the quiet discipline of the monasteries, the unexpected energy of samurai parties, and settled into the serene philosophy of wabi. You've glimpsed the dedication of the masters and the beauty held within simple objects and deliberate movements. As the echoes of the water boiling and the whisking fade, allow yourself to sink deeper into your bed. Feel the tranquility we explored settle over you. The world outside can wait. For now, there is just the quiet space you're in, the gentle rhythm of your breath, and the lingering sense of peace from this ancient, beautiful path. Release any tension. Let your thoughts drift like steam from a warm bowl. You are here. You are present. And you are safe. End of script. Sweet dreams.